My 6-year-old called me crying. Mom, please come get me. When I arrived at my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law blocked the door and said, "She's not leaving." When I pushed past her and saw my daughter, what I found made me lose control completely. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window of Helen Whitlow's duplex, catching dust motes in the air as she folded the last of Avery's school clothes. The small living room smelled faintly of the vanilla candle she'd lit earlier, trying to make the space feel less empty without her daughter's laughter filling it. It was Wednesday, the third day of Avery's week-long stay with her paternal grandparents in Mapleton, and Helen had spent most of it trying to convince herself that everything was fine. She smoothed out a pink t-shirt with a unicorn on the front, Avery's favorite, and added it to the neat pile on the couch. The television murmured in the background. Some afternoon talk show she wasn't really watching. Outside, a lawn mower droned somewhere down the street. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Then the phone rang. Not her phone. The old tablet on the kitchen counter. The one Avery only used when she stayed at her grandparents' house because Carolyn refused to let her use the landline unsupervised. Helen had almost forgotten it was there, plugged into the charger near the coffee maker. She glanced at the screen. Avery's name. Helen's stomach tightened. Not quite alarm. Not yet, but something close to it. Avery knew the rules. She wasn't supposed to call unless it was an emergency, or unless Grandma said it was okay. And Carolyn never said it was okay. Helen picked up the tablet, swiping to answer. "Hello? Baby." Silence. Then breathing, soft, shaky breathing. "Mama." The word came out as a whisper, barely audible, and Helen felt her heart drop into her stomach. "What happened, baby?" She kept her voice steady, automatic, the way she always did when Avery was scared. "Don't let her hear your panic. Don't make it worse. Please come get me." Helen sank onto the edge of the couch, the laundry forgotten. Her hand tightened around the tablet. "Avery, sweetheart, talk to me. What's going on?" Another pause. Helen could hear something in the background. A door closing, maybe, or footsteps in another room. "I'm in the bedroom," Avery whispered, her voice so small it broke Helen's heart. "Grandma says I'm being punished. I didn't mean to." That word landed like a fist. Punished. Helen's mind raced. Carolyn had always been strict. Everyone knew that, but punished? For what? Avery was 6 years old. She colored outside the lines sometimes. She forgot to say please. She was 6. "Are you alone right now?" Helen asked, already standing up, already moving toward the hallway where she'd left her keys. "Yes." Grandma said crying is disrespectful. Helen stopped. "Crying is disrespectful." She said, "I have to stay here until I learn." Helen grabbed her purse from the hook by the door, her keys jangling in her hand. She didn't call first. She didn't text Todd to ask what was happening. She didn't stop to think. She just went. The drive to Mapleton took 23 minutes, but it felt like hours. Helen's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept the tablet on the passenger seat, the call still connected. Avery's quiet breathing the only sound on the other end. "I'm coming, baby," Helen said into the silence. "I'm almost there. You're going to be okay." "Okay," Avery whispered back. Helen's mind spun as she drove, replaying every warning sign she'd ignored over the past 2 years. Every time Carolyn had made a comment about Avery's behavior. Every time Todd had defended his mother with that same exhausted expression. That's just how she is. Old wounds, Helen thought bitterly. No, old patterns. She'd met Carolyn Whitlow on a Sunday afternoon in the fall of 2017, 3 months after she and Todd had started dating. Carolyn had invited them for dinner at the brick house on Hadley Street, the house Todd had grown up in, the house where his father had died of a heart attack in 2015, leaving Carolyn alone with her rigid rules and her unshakable belief that the world was going soft. Helen remembered walking through that front door for the first time, feeling the weight of Carolyn's gaze like a physical thing. The older woman had looked her up and down, taking in Helen's jeans and casual sweater, her lack of jewelry, the way she laughed too loud at Todd's jokes. "So you're a teacher," Carolyn had said over dinner, her tone flat. "Preschool," Helen had replied, smiling. "I work with 3- and 4-year-olds." Carolyn had nodded slowly, cutting her chicken with precise, deliberate movements. "That must be exhausting. All that noise." Helen had laughed, thinking it was a joke. "It can be, but I love it." Carolyn had set down her fork. Children need structure, discipline, not coddling. Todd had changed the subject, but Helen had felt the judgment settle over her like a cold mist. Over the years, it only got worse. When Helen got pregnant with Avery, Carolyn had made it clear she thought they were too young, too unprepared. When Helen wanted a natural birth, Carolyn had scoffed and said she'd had 3 C-sections and never complained. When Avery cried as a newborn, as all newborns do, Carolyn had told Helen she was holding her too much, spoiling her, teaching her that tears would always get attention. "You're making her weak," Carolyn had said once, watching Helen rock Avery to sleep. Helen had bitten her tongue. She'd smiled. She'd nodded. She'd been young. She'd been trying to keep the peace. And then the marriage had fallen apart. Todd had been a good man, kind, steady, reliable, but he'd also been a ghost. Present, but not there. He worked long hours at the auto plant, came home tired, zoned out in front of the TV. When Helen tried to talk to him about their relationship, he'd shrug and say everything was fine. When she tried to talk to him about his mother, he'd shut down completely. "She means well," he'd say. "She's just old-fashioned." "She makes me feel like I'm doing everything wrong," Helen had replied. "You're not. She has opinions." Opinions. That was the word Todd always used. Opinions. Not control. Not cruelty. Not the slow, insidious way Carolyn undermined Helen's parenting at every turn. When they divorced in 2023, Carolyn's disapproval had turned into something sharper, something personal. At the custody hearing, Carolyn had sat in the back row, her face tight with judgment. Afterward, she'd cornered Helen in the courthouse parking lot. "You're making a mistake," Carolyn had said. "That girl needs stability. You're going to ruin her." Helen had walked away without responding, but she'd never forgotten the look in Carolyn's eyes. Cold, certain, righteous. "You're wrong. You've always been wrong. And I'll prove it." Helen turned onto Hadley Street, her heart pounding. The brick house sat at the end of the block, modest and neat, the lawn perfectly trimmed, the shutters freshly painted. It looked like a postcard. It looked safe. Helen knew better. She parked at the curb, grabbed the tablet, and got out. The air was warm, thick with the smell of cut grass and summer heat. Somewhere a dog barked. A car passed, slow and lazy. Helen walked up the driveway, her footsteps quick and purposeful. She didn't knock. She rang the doorbell and waited, her pulse thrumming in her ears. The door opened. Carolyn stood in the doorway, filling the frame with her small, stiff body. She was 67, thin and wiry, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that seemed permanently set in disapproval. She wore a pale blue blouse tucked into khaki pants, sensible shoes, no jewelry except for her wedding ring. She looked at Helen and frowned. "What are you doing here?" She parked at the curb, grabbed the tablet, and got out. The air was warm, thick with the smell of cut grass and summer heat. Somewhere a dog barked. A car passed, slow and lazy. Helen walked up the driveway, her footsteps quick and purposeful. She didn't knock. She rang the doorbell and waited, her pulse thrumming in her ears. The door opened. Carolyn stood in the doorway, filling the frame with her small, stiff body. She was 67, thin and wiry, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that seemed permanently set in disapproval. She wore a pale blue blouse tucked into khaki pants, sensible shoes, no jewelry except for her wedding ring. She looked at Helen and frowned. "What are you doing here?" Helen kept her voice calm. "I'm here to pick up Avery." Carolyn shook her head. "She's staying." "No," Helen said. "She's not." Carolyn's jaw tightened. "She lied today. She needs to learn consequences." Helen felt something cold settle in her chest. "Move, Carolyn." "You overreact to everything," Carolyn said, her voice clipped. "You always have. You let her get away with murder. She manipulates you." Helen stepped closer. "Move." Carolyn didn't budge. "She spilled juice on purpose and then lied about it. I told her there would be no dinner if she couldn't tell the truth." Helen's stomach turned. "No dinner?" "She had lunch. She's not starving." Helen looked past Carolyn into the dim hallway. She could see the edge of the living room, the old floral couch, the framed photos on the wall. Everything looked the same as it always had. Tidy, controlled, sterile. "Where is she?" Helen asked. "In the guest room. She's thinking about what she did." Helen pushed past her. Carolyn made a sound of protest, but Helen didn't stop. She walked down the hallway, past the living room, past the kitchen where Todd's old baseball trophies still lined the shelf, past the bathroom with its faded wallpaper. The guest room door was closed. Helen opened it. The room was dark. That was the first thing Helen noticed, the heavy curtains drawn shut, blocking out the late afternoon sun. The air inside was stale and warm, like no one had opened a window in days. Helen's eyes adjusted slowly, and then she saw her. Avery sat on the edge of the twin bed, her small body curled into itself, her hands folded in her lap. She wore the yellow sundress Helen had packed for her, the one with the little daisies, but it was wrinkled now, and one of the straps had slipped down her shoulder. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, tangled and uncombed. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears. "Avery!" Helen breathed, crossing the room in 3 steps. Avery looked up. Her eyes were red and puffy, her bottom lip trembling. "Mama." Helen knelt in front of her, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Avery's face crumpled, and she threw her arms around Helen's neck, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Helen held her tight, feeling the small, rapid heartbeat against her chest, the way Avery's body shook with silent sobs. "It's okay," Helen whispered, stroking her hair. "It's okay. I've got you." Behind her, Carolyn appeared in the doorway, arms folded across her chest. "She's being dramatic," Carolyn said flatly. "She's been in here for 2 hours. She could have apologized at any time." Helen didn't turn around. She kept her focus on Avery, gently pulling back to look at her daughter's face. "Baby, what happened? Tell me what happened." Avery sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I spilled juice," she said, her voice small and hoarse. "It was an accident. I was trying to pour it myself, and it spilled." Helen brushed a strand of hair from Avery's forehead. "That's all." Avery nodded. "But Grandma said I was lying. She said I did it on purpose to make a mess." Helen felt her jaw tighten. She stood slowly, turning to face Carolyn. "She's 6 years old. 6-year-olds spill things." Carolyn's expression didn't change. "She's old enough to know better. She's old enough to clean up after herself and tell the truth." She did tell the truth. She didn't. She said the cup slipped. I watched her. She wasn't paying attention. She was distracted, playing with that ridiculous toy at the table. Helen took a breath. "So you sent her to her room. For the entire afternoon?" "Yes." "And told her there would be no dinner." "Correct." Carolyn straightened her shoulders. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. You don't teach her that. You let her do whatever she wants. You baby her. Helen stared at the woman in front of her. This woman who had raised 3 sons with an iron fist, who believed love was something earned through obedience, who thought a child's tears were manipulation instead of communication. "It's 6 o'clock," Helen said evenly. "She had lunch 5 hours ago. She'll remember next time." Helen shook her head slowly. "No, she won't, because there won't be a next time." Carolyn's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Helen turned back to Avery. "Come on, sweetheart. Get your things. We're leaving." "Helen." "Don't." Helen's voice was sharp, cutting. "Don't say another word." She helped Avery off the bed, taking her hand. Avery's fingers were cold, trembling. Helen looked around the room for Avery's backpack, her shoes, anything they'd need. She spotted the small pink suitcase in the corner, already packed. As Helen reached for it, something caught her eye. Avery's hands. The skin around her wrists was red, angry, raised marks that looked like they'd been pressed or gripped too hard. Helen froze. She knelt again, gently taking Avery's hands in hers. "Baby, what's this?" Avery looked down at her wrists, then quickly pulled them away, tucking them behind her back. "Nothing." "Avery." Helen kept her voice soft, patient. "Let me see." Slowly, reluctantly, Avery held out her hands again. The marks were fresh, probably from earlier today. They circled both wrists like bracelets, the skin slightly swollen, the kind of marks that came from someone holding too tight for too long. Helen's blood went cold. She looked up at Carolyn, who stood in the doorway with her arms still folded, her face impassive. "What's that?" Helen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carolyn shrugged. "I held her still. She wouldn't stop crying." Helen stood. "You held her still?" "Yes. She was hysterical, screaming. I needed her to calm down." "So you grabbed her wrists?" "I restrained her, yes. She needed to learn that tantrums don't work in this house." Something inside Helen shifted. Something that had been bending for years suddenly snapped. "She's 6, Helen said, her voice low and steady. "She's 6 years old. And she needs discipline. She needs care. She needs compassion. She needs adults who don't hurt her when she's scared." Carolyn's face darkened. "I didn't hurt her. I corrected her. There's a difference. Look at her wrists." "She's fine. You're overreacting. You always overreact." Helen picked up the suitcase with one hand, keeping Avery's hand in the other. "We're leaving." Carolyn stepped into the doorway, blocking the exit. "You're being ridiculous. This is exactly why that girl has no respect. You don't follow through with anything. You give in the second she cries." Helen met her eyes. "Move." "No." They stood there for a long moment, the air between them crackling with tension. Avery pressed against Helen's leg, silent and trembling. And then Helen stepped forward, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of Carolyn's perfume, something floral and old-fashioned. "I'm not asking again." Carolyn held her ground for another second, then stepped aside, her face tight with anger. Helen walked past her, pulling Avery gently along. They moved down the hallway, through the living room, toward the front door. Helen's heart pounded, her breath coming fast. She could feel Carolyn behind them, following, watching. As they reached the entryway, Helen saw him. Todd stood near the kitchen archway, one hand braced against the wall, his face pale. He wore his work clothes, the navy coveralls from the plant, still smelling faintly of oil and metal. He'd probably just gotten home. He looked tired. He always looked tired. He didn't say anything. Helen stopped. "You're not even going to say something?" Todd rubbed his face with one hand, not meeting her eyes. "Mom was just trying to help." The words hung in the air. Trying to help. Helen felt something inside her chest crack open, something she'd been holding closed for years. "Trying to help," she repeated softly. Todd looked at her then, and she saw it, the same look he'd had during their marriage. The exhaustion, the defeat, the quiet resignation that said this is how things are, and there's no point fighting it. "She doesn't mean," he started. "Don't," Helen interrupted. "Don't finish that sentence." She opened the front door and walked out, pulling Avery with her. Behind them, Carolyn's voice rose, sharp and indignant. "You're going to regret this, Helen. You're going to regret this when that girl grows up with no boundaries, no discipline, no." Helen closed the door. The sound of it, the solid, final thunk, was the loudest thing she'd heard all day. She walked Avery to the car, opened the back door, helped her into the booster seat. Avery was quiet now, her face blank, her eyes distant. Helen buckled her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're safe now, baby. I promise." Then she got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away. She didn't look back. That night Helen couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood. A car passing, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The house was quiet, but her mind wouldn't stop. Avery had barely spoken since they got home. She'd eaten half a sandwich, taken a bath, and gone to bed without protest. No questions, no explanations, just silence. That scared Helen more than anything. Around midnight, she heard it, a soft whimpering from Avery's room. Helen threw off the covers and padded down the short hallway, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She pushed open Avery's door and found her daughter curled in a ball under the blankets, shaking. "Baby," Helen whispered, crossing to the bed. Avery looked up, her face wet with tears. "Mama." Helen climbed into the narrow bed, pulling Avery into her arms. "I'm here. I'm right here." "I can't sleep," Avery said, her voice breaking. "I keep thinking about." "About what, sweetheart?" Avery buried her face in Helen's shoulder. She said, "I'm bad." She said, "I'm a bad girl." Helen's chest tightened. "You're not bad. You're perfect." "But I spilled the juice. I made a mess." "That was an accident. Accidents happen." "Grandma said," Avery's voice caught. "She said you don't punish me because you don't care. She said real mothers teach their kids to be good." Helen felt something inside her ignite, not loud anger, not the kind that shouted and broke things, but something colder, something focused. "Look at me," Helen said gently. Avery lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. "I care about you more than anything in this world," Helen said. "I love you more than you will ever understand. And you are not bad. You are kind and funny and smart and brave. Do you hear me?" Avery nodded, but Helen could see the doubt in her eyes. The damage had been done. The words had sunken. "She said crying is for babies," Avery whispered. "She said if I can't stop crying, I should stay in my room so no one has to hear me." Helen held her daughter closer, her mind racing. How many times had this happened? How many times had Carolyn said things like this, done things like this, when Helen wasn't there to stop it? She thought about the marks on Avery's wrists, the way Avery had pulled her hands away, ashamed, the way she'd gone silent in the car. This wasn't discipline. This was something else. "You never have to go back there," Helen said firmly. "Do you understand? You never have to see Grandma again if you don't want to." Avery looked up at her. "Really? Really? What about Daddy?" Helen paused. "Daddy loves you, but he doesn't get to decide this. I do. And I say you're safe. I say no one gets to hurt you. Okay." Avery nodded slowly. "Okay." They lay there together until Avery's breathing evened out, until her small body relaxed and sleep finally took her. Helen stayed awake, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, feeling the weight of what came next settling over her. She didn't threaten. She prepared. The next morning, Helen called in sick to work. She made Avery breakfast, pancakes with chocolate chips, Avery's favorite, and they ate together at the small kitchen table. Avery was quiet but present, picking at her food, occasionally smiling when Helen made a silly face. After breakfast, Helen took photos. She photographed Avery's wrists from multiple angles, making sure the marks were visible. She noted the time, the date, the lighting. She wrote down everything Avery had told her, the spilled juice, the punishment, the things Carolyn had said. She documented the timeline, when Avery had called, when Helen had arrived, what she'd found. She didn't do this because she wanted to. She did it because she knew what came next. That afternoon, she called the elementary school where Avery was enrolled for first grade in the fall. She spoke with the principal, Ms. Okafor, a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "I need to update Avery's emergency contact list," Helen said. "I need to remove her paternal grandparents." There was a pause on the other end. "May I ask why?" Helen took a breath. "I don't feel comfortable with them having access to my daughter. I need you to make a note in the system that they are not authorized to pick her up, visit her, or contact her in any way." "I see." Ms. Okafor's voice was professional but gentle. "Has something happened?" Helen explained, briefly, clinically, what had occurred at Carolyn's house. The punishment, the marks, the emotional harm. Ms. Okafor listened without interrupting. When Helen finished, there was a long silence. "I'm going to make those changes right now," Ms. Okafor said finally, "and I'm going to flag Avery's file for the school counselor. If her grandmother attempts to contact the school, we'll notify you immediately." "Thank you," Helen said, her voice shaking slightly. "Ms. Whitlow," Ms. Okafor added, "you're doing the right thing." Helen hung up and stared at the phone in her hand. The right thing. Why did the right thing feel so heavy? Over the next few days, Helen made more calls. She spoke with a family counselor recommended by a friend. She made an appointment for Avery to see a child psychologist. She drafted an email to Todd, clear and direct. "Avery will not be staying with your mother again. This is not negotiable. If you want to see Avery, we can arrange supervised visits, but Carolyn is not to be present." She didn't send the email right away. She wanted to make sure her words were calm, measured, impossible to argue with. On the fourth day, Carolyn called. Helen let it go to voicemail. The message was long, rambling, furious. Carolyn's voice was tight with indignation. "You are being unreasonable. You are being dramatic. That child needs structure, and you are failing her. You have always failed her. If you think you can keep her from me, you're wrong. I have rights. Todd has rights. You can't just—" Helen deleted the message before it finished. The next call came from Todd. This time Helen answered. "We need to talk," Todd said. "No," Helen replied. "We don't." "Helen, come on. This is getting out of hand." "Out of hand?" Helen's voice was calm, eerily calm. "Your mother left marks on our daughter's wrists. She locked her in a dark room for hours. She told her crying is disrespectful, and you think I'm out of hand." "She didn't mean—" "Don't say she didn't mean it. Don't you dare." Todd sighed, the sound heavy and tired. "Mom's upset. She feels like you're overreacting. She wants to apologize." "I don't care what she wants." "Helen." "No." Helen stood up, pacing her small living room. "I'm done, Todd. I'm done pretending this is okay. I'm done making excuses for her. And I'm especially done with you defending her. I'm not defending her. I just think. You always think she means well. You always think I'm being too sensitive. But you know what? I don't care what you think anymore. Avery is my priority. Not your mother. Not your feelings. Avery." There was a long pause. "You can't keep her from me," Todd said quietly. "I'm not keeping her from you. I'm keeping her from your mother. If you can't understand the difference, that's your problem." Helen hung up. Her hands were shaking. Her heart pounded. But she didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't second-guess herself. 2 weeks later, Carolyn showed up at the elementary school. It was a Tuesday morning. Helen had just dropped Avery off, watching her daughter walk into the building with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Avery had smiled before she went inside. Actually smiled, and Helen had felt something in her chest ease. Progress. Slow but real. Helen was halfway to her car when her phone rang. Ms. Okafor's name flashed on the screen. Ms. Whitlow, we have a situation. Mrs. Carolyn Whitlow is here at the front office. She's asking to see Avery. Helen's stomach dropped. Don't let her near her. We won't. We've already informed her that she's not on the authorized list. She's not taking it well. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Helen turned the car around and sped back to the school. Her mind raced. What was Carolyn thinking? What was she planning? When Helen arrived, she found Carolyn in the front office, standing at the counter, her face red with anger. The school secretary sat behind the desk, calm but firm. Ms. Okafor stood nearby, arms crossed. You can't do this, Carolyn was saying, her voice rising. I'm her grandmother. I have a right. You don't have any rights, Helen said from the doorway. Carolyn spun around. This is your fault. You're poisoning that child against me. Helen walked into the office, stopping a few feet away from Carolyn. I'm protecting my child. There's a difference. You're overreacting. You're being dramatic. I'm done listening to you, Helen interrupted. You're not welcome in Avery's life. You're not welcome at her school. If you come here again, I'll file a restraining order. Carolyn's face went white, then red. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Ms. Okafor stepped forward. Mrs. Whitlow, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you refuse, I'll call the police. For a moment, Carolyn looked like she might argue. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The office was silent. Helen let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thank you, she said to Ms. Okafor. Of course. The principal's expression was kind but serious. If she comes back, we'll handle it. You have my word. Helen nodded and left, her legs shaking as she walked back to her car. That was the last attempt. 3 weeks later, Todd called again. Helen almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up, maybe curiosity, maybe the faint hope that he'd finally understand. Hey, Todd said. His voice was different, quieter. What do you want? I want to talk. About Avery. About everything. Helen leaned against the kitchen counter. Okay, talk. Mom's really hurt, Todd said. She feels like you're cutting her out of Avery's life for no reason. For no reason? Helen's voice was flat. Did you see Avery's wrists? She said that was an accident. It wasn't an accident, Todd. It was control. It was your mother deciding that a 6-year-old child needed to be restrained because she was crying. Todd was quiet for a moment. She didn't mean to hurt her. Didn't mean to. Helen closed her eyes. That's what you always say. She didn't mean to. She didn't know. She was just trying to help. But you know what, Todd? Intent doesn't erase harm. She hurt our daughter, and you stood there and watched. I didn't. You did. You stood in that kitchen and said she was trying to help, and then you let us walk out without saying another word. Todd exhaled. I'm asking you to reconsider. Please. She's family. Helen opened her eyes. No. Helen. She's not family, Helen said quietly. Family doesn't hurt you. Family doesn't make you feel like you're not good enough. Family doesn't leave marks on a child's body and call it discipline. She's my mother. And Avery is my daughter. And I will always choose her. Every time. There was a long silence. Helen could hear Todd breathing on the other end. Could picture him rubbing his face the way he always did when he didn't know what to say. "This is how I am," Helen said, echoing his words from years ago. "I protect my child, and if you can't accept that, then we have nothing else to talk about." She hung up. This time she didn't shake. She didn't cry. She felt something settle inside her chest, something solid and unshakable. She'd drawn the line, and she wasn't moving it. 3 months passed. Autumn arrived, painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson. The air turned crisp, and Helen found herself lighting candles in the evenings again, the scent of cinnamon and apples filling the duplex. Avery started first grade. She made friends, 2 girls named Lily and Emma, who came over for playdates and left the living room covered in art supplies and giggles. She joined the school's after-school drama club, where she got to dress up and pretend to be a pirate one week and a fairy the next. She laughed more. She slept through the night. She stopped apologizing for every little thing. One evening, as Helen was tucking her in, Avery looked up at her with those wide, dark eyes and asked, "Grandma won't be mad at me anymore, right?" Helen sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Avery's hair back from her forehead. The question didn't surprise her. Avery had asked variations of it before, tentative, testing, making sure the promise still held. "No one who hurts you gets that power," Helen said gently. "Not Grandma. Not anyone." Avery nodded slowly. "Okay. Do you understand what that means?" "I think so." Avery pulled the blanket up to her chin. "It means you won't let anyone hurt me." "That's right. Even if they're family?" "Especially if they're family." Avery seemed to think about this. "What about Daddy?" Helen paused. Todd had called a few more times, but the conversations had been brief and strained. He wanted to see Avery. Helen had agreed to supervised visits at a park or restaurant, places where Carolyn couldn't show up unannounced. They'd had 2 so far. Todd had been awkward but kind, bringing Avery her favorite books and asking about school. He didn't mention his mother. Neither did Helen. "Daddy loves you," Helen said, "but even Daddy has to follow the rules. And the rules are, no one hurts you. No one scares you. No one makes you feel like you're bad." "I'm not bad," Avery said, more confident this time. "No, baby, you're not." Avery smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too. So much." Helen kissed her forehead, turned on the nightlight, and stood to leave. "Mama." Avery's voice was soft. "Yeah. Thank you for coming to get me." Helen's throat tightened. "I will always come get you, no matter what. Okay. Okay." Helen closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the weight of the past few months settle over her. She thought about the phone call, the drive to Mapleton, the look on Carolyn's face when Helen had walked past her, the marks on Avery's wrists. She thought about Todd's voice. Mom was just trying to help. She thought about the moment she'd hung up the phone, the moment she'd drawn the line, the moment she decided that no one, not her ex-husband, not his mother, not anyone, would ever make her doubt herself again. Helen didn't yell. She didn't forgive. She didn't explain herself again. She chose her daughter, and that, in the end, was the only story that mattered. She walked back to the living room, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat down on the couch. The house was quiet, peaceful. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting warm pools of light along the sidewalk. A breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree in the front yard. Helen took a sip of tea and let herself breathe. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace. Not because the battle was over. There might be more calls, more attempts, more moments when she'd have to stand firm. But because she knew, without a doubt, that she could do it. She could protect her daughter. She could hold the line. And no one would make her let go.